Podcast 314, Crossing the Line, Etymology, Epistemology, and Professional Theological Practice, ISBN 978 976 9806917, copyright 2026. Welcome back to the Scholar's Crossroads, where we examine the intersections of language, culture, and professional practice. I am your host, Dr. William Anderson Gittins, Doctor of Divinity, broadcasting from Bridgetown, Barbados. And today we are exploring a phrase that permeates our moral vocabulary, or professional ethics, and or theological reflections: crossing the line. Being your guide for this conversation, it should be noted that my forthcoming work, slated for 2026 publication, offers a multifaceted examination of this idiomatic expression. My research, Podcast 314, Crossing the Line, Etymology, Epistemology, and Professional Theological Practice, ISBN 978 976 9806917, copyright 2026, promises to illuminate how boundaries function across diverse professional and theological domains. Segment 1, Defining the Boundary. Let us begin with the foundational question: what exactly do we mean when we speak of crossing the line? With the assistance of my research and linguistic lens, I posit the view that the phrase carries tremendous weight in our collective consciousness. As I note in my forthcoming work, crossing the line serves as a powerful descriptor for moments when individuals exceed the limits of accessibility behavior, particularly within moral or professional contexts. Gittins 2026. I must confess that the etymology lens here underscores the fact that it is quite illuminating, isn't it? The semantic origin draws upon the visual metaphor of a drawn boundary, a demarcation intended to separate the permissible from the prohibited, grammatis nd. Think of a line drawn in the sand, a threshold that once crossed signals a fundamental shift in status or standing. Yet, as I understand the argument, viewing this phrase merely as a violation would be reductive. This is where my research takes a critical turn. In scholarly and creative practice, the line often becomes the site of necessary friction. I challenge my readers and listeners to look through a multifaceted research lens, one that combines the visual acuity of the cinematographer with the moral scrutiny of the theologian. Gittins 2026. So, we are not simply asking whether professionals cross boundaries, but how they do so, and whether this transgression might be intrinsic to the human experience itself. This is precisely the pertinent question I pose in my work, and I believe the answer reveals something profound about human nature, creativity, and moral development. Segment 2, the professional gaze. Let us turn to the professional realm, specifically the media arts. I bring a unique perspective as someone versed in photojournalism and cinematography. How does crossing the line manifest in these fields? Here, we encounter a fascinating duality. In filmmaking, we have the 180-degree rule, a technical guideline that establishes an imagery axis on set. If the camera crosses this line, the audience's spatial orientation becomes confused. The rule exists to maintain visual coherence. 180-degree rule, ND. A literal line, indeed, but here's where it becomes artistically profound. The most impactful images often emerge when a creator dares to cross the boundary of objectivity or safety to capture a visceral truth. Think of the photojournalist who ventures into dangerous territory to document injustice, or the cinematographer who breaks conventional framing to convey emotional disorientation. Gittins, 2026. Therefore, the transgression becomes a tool for deeper truth-telling, and this extends to the podcaster, the publisher, and the writer. In our current cultural climate, often polarized by rigid ideological boundaries, the media arts specialist must navigate the tension between resonant storytelling and ethical responsibility. To discuss crossing the line in this context is to discuss the breaking of norms. These professions are not merely about adhering to limits. They are about understanding where those limits lie and what occurs when they are challenged. You, the audience, might be thinking that it sounds as though I am suggesting that professional growth itself requires a willingness to approach and sometimes cross these boundaries. Without question, innovation never occurs within the comfortable center of established practice. It emerges at the edges, at the margins, precisely where the lines are drawn. Segment 3. The theological and cultural imperative. Let us now turn to the theological dimension, which I understand forms the heart of my inquiry. How does the concern of crossing the line function within theological frameworks? This is where the inquiry deepens considerably. Writing from the vantage point of a doctor of divinity, I invite a theological reading of boundary violation. In many theological traditions, the concept of the line is central to the narrative of the fall, the ultimate transgression of divine boundaries. The Eden narrative, Genesis 2:8-14, comes to mind. The forbidden fruit, the boundary that was crossed. Yet, here's the theological paradox. It is also within the crossing of these lines that redemption and growth often occur. The biblical narrative is replete with figures who cross boundaries. Abraham leaving his homeland, Genesis 12:1-2. Moses confronting Pharaoh, Exodus 5:1, Exodus 5:2, Exodus 5, and Exodus 5:6-9. The prophets challenging established religious practice. Each transgression serve a larger divine purpose. We can ask whether the line serves both as a moral boundary and as a catalyst for spiritual development. From research, I humbly suggest that as a cultural theorist, I believe that this connects directly to cultural theory. As a cultural theorist, I am also arguing that culture itself is defined by what it permits and what it forbids. Therefore, crossing the line is not merely an act of defiance. Therefore, crossing the line is not merely an act of deviance. It is an act of definition. By transgressing a boundary, the actor forces society to re-evaluate the validity and rigidity of that boundary. After a provocative reframing, it should be noted that the transgressor becomes, in some sense, a cultural catalyst. Therefore, through my lived experience lens, I agree that whether through the lens of a camera or the pages of a theological treatise, the act of crossing the line is a mechanism for cultural evolution. This is central to my thesis. Segment 4 is crossing the line inherent to human culture? This brings us to the core question of my inquiry. Is crossing the line part of human culture? And if you suspect that my answer is affirmative, I agree that the evidence overwhelmingly suggests an affirmative response. Consider this. If culture is the collective expression of human values, it must be dynamic rather than static. Stagnation occurs when lines are never crossed. Innovation, reform, and revolution occur when they are Let me provide examples from my research. The photographer who crosses the line of privacy to expose injustice. Think of the civil rights photographers who documented segregation. The theologian who crosses the line of dogma to find spiritual truth. Think of the reformers who challenge ecclesiastical authority. The writer who crosses the line of social convention to challenge the status quo. Think of the literary pioneers who gave voice to the marginalized. Each demonstrates that boundary transgression is intrinsic to the human condition. Through these calculated risks, humanity expands its understanding of itself. The line paradoxically exists to be crossed, not recklessly, but thoughtfully, purposefully, with an awareness of what is at stake. I'm sure you will agree with me that there is a responsibility inherent in this, which can be categorized as immense responsibility. Not all crossings are virtuous. The distinction lies in the motivation and the consequences. This is why the professional and theological lenses must be held together. The visual acuity to see clearly and the moral scrutiny to judge rightly. Segment 5, Synthesis and Conclusion. As we conclude our conversation, Dr. William Anderson Gittins, Doctor of Divinity, humbly suggests that we will all want to know how my work provides a vital framework for understanding crossing the line, not merely as a moral failing, but as a complex professional and epistemological phenomenon. Whether viewed through the lens of grammar, media arts, or divinity, the idiom represents the constant human struggle to balance order with progress. A balance that is never fully achieved but perpetually negotiated. To cross the line is to test the boundaries of our reality. It is a practice that is indeed woven into the very fabric of human culture. The question is never whether we will cross the lines, but how we will do so, with what awareness, what intention, and what commitment to the greater good. I am Dr. William Anderson Gittins, Doctor of Divinity. I hope that this conversation was an illuminating conversation. My forthcoming work, Crossing the Line, Etymology, Epistemology, and Professional Theological Practice, promises to be an essential contribution to multiple fields of inquiry. Thank you. I would encourage you listeners to reflect on the lines in your own professional and personal lives, not merely as constraints, but as invitations to deeper understanding. This has been the Scholars Crossroads. Join us next time as we continue to explore the intersections of language, culture, and practice. Until then, may your own crossings be thoughtful, purposeful, and just. God bless.